Welcome to the Totally Biased podcast, the audio show that ditches the filters and embraces our biases. Get ready for our totally biased takes on the biggest games, fiercest rivalries, and everything in between. It's all about college football here.
All about college football. Hope you all are doing well. Just want to kind of get this one started and kind of tell you a little bit about what this show is going to be all about. Me personally, I grew up a massive football fan. Played it for a long time and fell in love with a lot more of the X's and O's, nitty and gritty of it. So you can expect from me, the disembodied voice, a lot more analysis of sort of the X's and O's and looking at the sort of nitty gritty of football that maybe some people miss out on, especially at the college level, where I feel like it's very easy to get caught up in pageantry as opposed to X's and O's.
On the other hand, I like to analyze the stats and also look into the marching bands, as marching band is my fascination around college football.
And don't worry, we're going to be talking about all the other fun little things and the stupid looking fans and the college football game day signs as well. So don't worry your pretty little hearts about that. We're definitely going to get those into.
But at the end of the day, the goal of this show is to show our total bias for our favorite teams.
Exactly.
Now, let's talk about the week in review, week one. Let's begin with our biased takes of the week. These could be super outlandish or totally reasonable. It just comes down to what we thought about last week's game. We're going to start by talking about one of the most recent games, USC versus LSU.
And I just find it so hard to talk about this game without kind of like laughing and giggling. It felt like the entire game was just like on just all sorts of drugs. It was all over the place. It was wild. It was crazy. But I do have a few notes about it. And, my biased take of the week is going to come from the fact that LSU is not going to make the playoff this year, period. I don't think there's kind of any avenue for them to do it. I think their schedule's too hard. And I mean, I just don't see a path for them. That's all I can say. When your offense struggles as much as it did, which I'll give USC some credit, their defense looked a lot better. They're playing a lot more zone than I expected them to and playing it really well. LSU also didn't look all that great on offense either.
And neither of these teams really showed any discipline at the line. There were a lot of penalties in this game. I think you can make a case that neither of these teams should have won and neither of these teams should be in the playoff. However, I was quite impressed by the performance of Miller Moss. Despite having one of his roughest games of his career in college, he persevered and helped his team win the game anyway.
I just loved Kyron Hudson. Are you kidding me? He looked like a circus character out there. It was insanity. One-handed grab on one-handed grab on one-handed grab. It's just he's the reason they won this game, right? And as much as I like to say I'm the X's and O's guy, I really like to dig into what teams are doing. I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't know what LSU could have done about any of those catches. I mean, they were insane.
And sometimes this spectacular wide receiver performance makes a difference.
It does. And you may go look at the stats and go, well, he had 5 receptions for 83 yards. It's like, technically, yes. But if you just watch these catches and the momentum that they gave USC, you could tell that when they came to block off the line, the offensive line was firing off a little bit harder. The running backs were running a little bit harder, and that's because of that momentum. When you see a guy make a big play like that, being in those situations before as an offensive lineman, oh my goodness, that makes you want to block and play so much harder. It's just where I'm at. I'm happy for USC. I think they may be a little bit of a sleeper team this year. They looked pretty good. I liked their defensive performance.
And you could argue a similar situation for Colorado and North Dakota State, where Colorado was really feeding off the energy of Travis Hunter making those spectacular catches, despite it maybe being uncalled offensive pass interference.
I do have to say, wow, there was a lot of pass interference in this game that did not get called, both defensive and offensive. I'm not going to accuse Travis Hunter of anything. I feel like, he's a much better athlete than I could ever dream of being. Man, there was a little bit of pushing and shoving going on over there. I think got away with a little bit of that. But Honestly, North Dakota State looked good in this game. I think Colorado just looked better. That's kind of my conclusion. Is I don't really have a whole lot of takeaways. Some people are like, oh, Colorado, kept it close with the FCS team. It's like, yeah, but it's also North Dakota State. So,
And for those that don't know, North Dakota State actually won the FCS championship last year. So for them, this was a pretty big game to make a statement for this year. But we're going to get into our biased games of the week.
we are going to be also talking about a couple more games. We just want to get to these games of the week, man, because these are some of, in my opinion, the best part of this show is going to be us talking about those games that you might have missed, right? And one of those, I think, was Boise State, Georgia Southern. For once, I want to say I watched a game where I was completely engaged with what was going on, despite one player just absolutely going off. Weirdly enough, whenever there's a player that's just going absolutely crazy, me personally, I kind of get a little tuned off by that just because it kind of feels inevitable. The result feels inevitable. Well, it's nice to see an outstanding performance. That's just kind of a me personally thing. I just don't really love to just see one-sided affairs. This was not a one-sided affair, but it had an outstanding performance from a running back that I will be talking about later, who just went absolutely insane. 267 yards, 6 touchdowns. That's all I got to say. I'll bring his name up later. If you're in NFL draft circles, you probably know his name already. But, man, he looked great in this game.
I really enjoyed watching Virginia Tech and Vanderbilt. Virginia Tech was a team that was highly anticipated to have a good season and maybe even be in the playoff race. And Vanderbilt at home just shut them down. They tried to get a little bit of life in the fourth quarter, and they took it to overtime. But then Vanderbilt stopped them on defense in the overtime.
I do want to say I love that choice. I was watching it live. So I actually went to a game earlier in the day, came back home. It was really hot where I was at, and I was just baking in the seats. But I get back to one of my friend's dorm rooms, and we start watching the end of that game, and we were just going crazy. We were having such a fun time watching it. And I want to shout out Vanderbilt's quarterback. He played outstanding in that game, was very, very clean. For the most part, I was very impressed by the way he played. If you didn't watch Boise State, Georgia Southern, you're not a true college football sicko, and I just want you to know that. This game's final score was 56-45. There were 5 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, 8 in the second half. The game was exhilarating. It was outstanding. I'll get to one of the reasons it was so awesome to watch later, but I'll just put it this way. It involves 267 yards and 6 touchdowns on the day in one of the most outstanding running back performances you're ever going to see.
And that leads us straight into our next segment, which is Players of the Week. We get to choose our biased Players of the Week. And I talked about mine quite a bit in our USC LSU segment, but mine is Miller Moss. Even though he had one of his worst days in his college football career, he still persevered for the win.
Even as rough as he looked at times, I got to give it to him. Because at the end of the day, sometimes you're going to have bad games like that. And if anything, it gives me more hope for USC because I don't think he's going to be like that consistently. But I guess it's time for my Player of the Week. And Ashton Jeanty is a national treasure. And if you're not watching him literally every time he's on television, I don't care what you're dealing with. I don't care if it's blackouts. I don't care if you don't have the channel. I don't care. Find a way to put your eyeballs on a screen where Ashton Jeanty plays football. Because it is so incredible to watch. He is the 267-yard, 6-touchdown monster I talked about previously. Now, he's known for being a little bit of a threat in the receiving game, especially if you go look at like NFL draft kind of dialogues. He had 4 yards receiving, so it really wasn't his day there. But I do just want to point out a crazy fact about this game. Boise State had 371 rushing yards total. It was one of the most insane performances on the ground you'll ever watch. Georgia Southern had a really good game too. Theirs was primarily through the passing game. But yeah, I just want to point this out. Ashton Jeanty, watch the Boise State Broncos this season. Grace your eyeballs with how incredible Ashton Jeanty is.
And I also had the opportunity to watch a little bit of that game and just seeing his performance, despite the shootout the game really was, it was impressive to see what he did on the ground.
He is so shifty. That's the thing I can't get over. I say this is very high praise. I think the Alvin Kamara comp gets thrown out like a lot for like shifty, does whatever, right? He didn't look like Alvin Kamara. I think in his as someone that watched his like 2023 tape because I was doing draft prep for that, looked a lot like Alvin Kamara. He ran like freaking Dalvin Cook. That's all I could think about was just Dalvin Cook's running style. It was so just spot on to how he ran it against Georgia Southern. But outstanding, outstanding game.
Now, there's a few other games we want to talk about this week. Obviously, USC, LSU, Boise State, Georgia Southern, and Virginia Tech, Vanderbilt are our favorites. But there were some other really good games this week.
And that's going to be kind of the segment we're going to do real quick. It's a week in review, a week recap, if you will. And we're just going to go kind of rapid fire through these games, some things that we noticed, some things that we saw, just some statements in general. So we're going to start with, I think, one of the biggest, it was a prime time game this week, Notre Dame, Texas A&M. How'd you feel about this one?
You gotta love what the Texas A&M fans bring. The 12th man, they do something very different. You know it's college football when the 12th man is out. This game, though, was pretty sloppy.
It was rough. And I think it was rough for both sides. I do want to get that out of the way. Notre Dame's young offensive line looked pretty good, though. And that's what I will say. I expected Texas A&M's pass rush to give them some issues because they lost Joe Alt, Blake Fisher, and others. But long story short, they got to replace 2 tackles. And the 2 young guys that came in there, and I can't recall their names because unfortunately I haven't memorized Notre Dame's offensive tackles yet. They looked pretty good. They had their struggles, but it's a really good Texas A&M defensive line. That Notre Dame defense looked elite. They look good. And Riley Leonard, I think, is going to be a good quarterback as well. I came away very impressed with Notre Dame. Even though it was a rough game, even though it was very defensive, I liked the way Notre Dame played.
But on the other hand, looking at Texas A&M, I thought Connor Wigman was going to do a little bit better than he did. He kind of struggled. Initially, going into the game, I was thinking this guy is making a Heisman statement in this game. But he really just left me wondering what Texas A&M is going to have this year.
Texas A&M looked good, but it was more of the same. That's what I put at the end of the game when I watched it. Because Texas A&M has done this every year. They played Alabama close. They've won some game against Alabama. They played LSU close. They've won some game against LSU. But at the end of the day, there's still just something about them that when it comes to these sort of big games, you can't trust them. And I get there under a new head coach, Mike Elko. Maybe things are different. But I left that feeling more of the same. Not to say it's always going to be that way, but man, it's just like all the talent in the world is there. You just don't see it assembled.
And moving to the other side of the SEC with more of the same, Florida and Miami coming to Florida.
Miami might be a top 5 most talented team in the country. Like, I don't know who would even go above them. Alabama, Georgia. And then I think you're starting to argue maybe Miami's number 3. Like, it may be that good. Ohio State's probably up there too, but I think a lot of their talent is young. Caleb Downs, Jeremiah Smith. They got Emeka Ibuka, but like, I think Miami might be in that argument, and it's mostly because of their quarterback, Cam freaking Ward.
He is so impressive. And you could argue Florida might be a bottom 5 talent team. They have a few guys, Montrell Johnson, but to be honest, they looked so bad.
I mean, I wouldn't call them a bottom 5 talent. Maybe in the SEC, I could maybe see that. But bottom line is Florida should have talent. They've recruited well. They've got DJ Lagway at quarterback, who stepped in for a injured Graham Mertz and looked better than Graham Mertz did. I will say that. But offensively, they just look uninspired. Like it's the same crap I keep seeing with these college offenses. Kind of have a tendency to get in their own way and just try to kind of overthink everything. And you can do this in multiple ways schematically, but to put it as simply as I can, Florida does it by just kind of running the same stuff when it's not working and just kind of getting stuck. I don't think they ever found a rhythm offensively. They looked rough defensively too. What happened? The defense was supposed to be better this year. You played a lot of true freshmen last year. But this year, I'd argue that Florida defense looked worse, at least against Miami.
Now, despite the rough performance overall, Florida did show a little bit of promise. Before halftime, it was only 17-10, and they had momentum. They scored right before the half, so it left the impression that they might come back and win this game.
They looked so bad in that second half, though.
Miami just shut them down.
And I don't even think it was, they didn't even look that good in the first half either. You walk away from that because Miami drove right down the field. It was 10-10, and Miami drove right down the field. And it was impressive. I mean, all I got to say, and this is a biased take of the week in some ways, but I think Billy Napier is going to be out of a job come November. He'll be coaching at like Arkansas State or something. It's just not, you can't do this at Florida. It's like when like Alabama hired the one coach that was only there for like 3 weeks. I'm blanking on his name, but he like gave out like a bunch of like vouchers and stuff like that to colleagues and said, "Oh, we're on school money," and started spending it very unwisely. I'm not saying Billy Napier is doing that. What I am saying is school funds are getting wasted paying his paycheck right now. We'll hit real quick on Old Dominion, South Carolina. I really only got one thing to say. Old Dominion. I can only picture, I don't know what movie it's from, but you blew it! You blew it! You blew it! It was ridiculous. You were up in this game late. Gosh, I think it was 1916.
1916.
And they fumbled the ball
On the three.
On the three, and then they gained 2 yards and then fumbled it again. I was like, guys, what are we doing? They were in such a good situation. Man, I don't know really what to say. Just Old Dominion, you blew it. You had it and you blew it.
And that's why we have to talk about this game, because many of you probably didn't watch, because South Carolina is awful. But
they're a bottom 5. I don't know. They actually have some talent. I just think that their coaches, like, there's overrated coaches, and I don't know what happened with Shane Beamer. He won 2 games against Clemson and Tennessee, which, by the way, seem dubious. There is some evidence that he may have talked with some Michigan people, and I'm not going to get too much into that because it's a little bit speculative. But he's won 2 games that were pretty big wins. I'll give him that. But other than that, South Carolina's like underperformed every single year. Name a big game they've won that's not Clemson and Tennessee.
They haven't. And Shane Beamer, arguably, is kind of similar to Billy Napier in this situation, where they're both just keeping their job, just doing the minimum.
Yeah,
keeping their job. They're going 6-6, 5-7, doing whatever they need to do to get that contract extension.
I think if either of them goes 6-6, 5-7, I think Beamer is definitely more on the hot seat. But in that situation, Napier is fired at 6-6. I think Beamer is on the hot seat. I think South Carolina people like Shane Beamer a lot more than Florida people like Billy Napier, because Florida, there's a little bit more of an expectation. South Carolina, there isn't as much, and I hate saying that, but to me, there's like tiers of SEC teams, right? And it's really hard to jump tiers. South Carolina jumped tiers at some point. They were consistently competing for the SEC championships, even for national titles briefly under Steve Spurrier, but they never really got into that next tier, which is like your Alabamas, your LSUs, at one point, Tennessee's, that sort of team.
Or Georgia.
Yeah, Georgia now, right? I think that the way I look at it, especially right now in the SEC, if you're not one of those top 6 teams, it's really, really hard. If you're not, I'll list off a 6 real quick, and this isn't like what I actually think, but if you're not, let's say, Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, let's say, and LSU, right? Ole Miss probably is better than A&M, but say you're not one of those 6 teams, you have to play at least one of those 6 teams every year, and you're going to lose. It's just too much talent, well coached talent for you to overcome. It's a tough situation, I think, for Florida and South Carolina. Because the thing about the SEC is like if you want any more evidence of it, look at what happened with Tennessee for forever. I mean, Tennessee was in the dredges of the conference for well over a decade and a half. And it's taken them under Josh Heupel, their first season was like what 7-6, 8-4, something like that. And it was considered a really big victory for the school to just be like that in the SEC. So it takes a long time to get out of the dredges, man.
And likewise for Kentucky.
Yeah.
Kentucky has been stuck in the mud for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
But as long as they go 7-5, 8-4, that's a good season for Kentucky.
And I think that's really important to note too. Is it takes a special coach and it takes a lot of talent and a lot of really really impassioned fans and a lot of money and a lot of recruiting to kind of build yourself up into that next tier, right? And I think the team that's about ready to do that is going to be Tennessee. Like that's my kind of biased take. I understand, but look at the way they're recruiting. You look at the way they're building. You look at the way that they might have Trevor Lawrence 2.0. That's the only thing I can think to compare Nico Imaliava to. Tennessee looks really solid, and I'm not saying they're going to go win championships, but just look at them going forward. I think they're really building this in a smart way. That's, I think, the biggest kind of statement I have.
Anyway, we'll touch more on that later.
Yeah, we will touch more on that later, but we need to keep on going with the games. I know we got stuck in the mud a little bit. Just Clemson versus Georgia. Real quick note.
Just hit the high points here.
Hit the high points here. Cade Klubnik does not look very good to me. I've never thought he looked very good to me. It might just be the Clemson offense. But Georgia's defense looks, oh my gosh, they're terrifying. They're terrifying. Malachi freaking Starks, dude. Why are you ever throwing the ball deep against Georgia? Like, unless Malachi Starks is on a blitz, I'm not throwing the ball deep because I swear that guy can teleport. It's insanity.
And that's not a crazy take from us to say that Georgia's defense is anything crazy.
Yeah.
Because they are. They're easily the best defense in the country. But there's other defenses that could be rivaling them, and we'll talk about them in the coming weeks as their performances pan out.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Just pointing out a score for everyone, too. Texas Tech, Abilene Christian. It was 52-51. Pointing that out. Game ended in overtime. Texas Tech was supposed to be a competitor in the new Big 12, and they really didn't look like it. I don't think the defense could have stopped a paper airplane. It was miserable. It was miserable. I caught maybe 15 minutes of the game when I was just sitting around studying. Ugh. It just made me throw up. It was so disgusting.
And Oregon and Idaho. What is Oregon doing playing a close game with Idaho? Final score 24-14.
They looked very unpolished. That was my thing with Oregon. I'm not sounding the alarm bells of, Oregon's going down the crapper. They played good on offense, but it just felt like they just kept screwing up at the worst possible times. They won this game. I'm happy they won this game. Man, they really should have played better.
And that wraps up our week in review. We'd also like to talk about halftime performances of the week. Marching bands are a huge part of the pageantry of college football. And there are a couple bands that really stood out this week. I'm going to talk about the best drill and the best musical performance, because I think these can be put into two different categories this week. The best drill, this comes to no surprise for anybody. Ohio State. If you're uninformed about marching bands and college marching bands, Ohio State is easily one of the best bands in the country. Their show this week was the music from Earth, Wind, and Fire. And after listening to it musically, it sounded okay, but it sounds like a week one band. They still have some time to improve this season, and I'm probably not going to talk about them too much this season because everybody knows they're good. But if it's the only performance I can find online, I might be talking about them again. Now, let's talk more about the drill that they did with this show. Yeah. Because that was impressive. Seeing how they kept diagonals and lines and spinning them around. Honestly, it's a lot harder than it looks. As a person in marching band myself, watching this drill was really impressive. Now, for the best musical performance this week, I'd have to give it to Tennessee's marching band. Their music was thematic to Tennessee, which is pretty unique, but also the difficulty of the music really showed. But despite the difficulty of the music, the band put on quite an impressive sound. They were loud, crisp, and especially the brass, trumpets, low brass, really excelled in this performance. This leads us into our preview of next week.
All right. I gotta let my buddy here just take over on the halftime shows of the week because I know that's something he's really passionate about. So I just want to let him. I want to let him take over for next week. I'm gonna try to hit the highlights as well as some games I think that people might want to watch that may be under the radar. First one I'm gonna hit on is actually a Friday night game that I think people really should be. I'm just gonna put it plain and simple. Watch BYU SMU. If for no other reason than to see if SMU can just deal with being a Power 5 team. I'm not saying I expect them not to be able to deal with that, but man, I don't know. I think if you're a curious college football fan, you should watch this. SMU looked okay against Nevada. I think they looked pretty good last week. I want to see them against BYU, a competent Power 5 team.
The interesting thing about BYU at SMU is that it's at SMU. And SMU is favored by 11 in this game despite struggling against Nevada. That will be a very interesting game to pay attention to.
I would be watching that one. I'd be watching that one. Another big game I'd be watching is Oklahoma State, Arkansas. Arkansas looked really solid, and their new quarterback, what's his name? Taylon Green, I believe,
is much better than KJ Jefferson.
Oh my gosh, Taylon Green looks awesome. He looked awesome. I was very impressed with him, especially his decision making. I think that went very underrated in that Arkansas Pine Bluff game. I understand it's Arkansas Pine Bluff and then not dealing with exactly the best cornerbacks in the world, but he's absurdly athletic. He makes good decisions, and I think he's a pretty accurate thrower of the football. I think he's got a little lack of arm talent. That's like the first thing I see when I watch his game. I don't think his arm's like elite, okay? But he's got a good arm. He's very accurate. I like Taylon Green.
Arkansas has a lot to prove in this matchup against a ranked Oklahoma State.
I absolutely agree with that. Arkansas is in a bit of a weird situation. I think that this year is going to be really tough for them. I do. You're looking at a team that has to play Auburn on the road, A&M on the road. They get Tennessee at home and they get LSU at home. But those are not going to be easy games. They get Ole Miss at home. Again, not an easy game. And they have to play Texas and Missouri. If you're telling me they can win 2 of those games, I'll be very impressed with Arkansas this season. This is a year I think they're going to need to build. I think it's going to be pretty tough. But, man, I would pay attention to Arkansas. The Razorbacks look kind of like a fun team this year.
They could be the Missouri of this year.
They definitely could. I've got to hit on, of course, the biggest game this week. That's Texas-Michigan, which for some godforsaken reason is the 12 o'clock noon kick on Saturday because Fox hates us. Seriously, if anyone from Fox is hearing this, get rid of big noon kickoff. Why are the biggest games of the week being played at 12 o'clock? I know a lot of people that after a long Friday night does not get up until about 1:30. Pointing it out there's a lot of college football fan, a lot of viewership you're missing out on just from that block. But, I mean, this game is going to be fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Quinn Ewers versus Warren. I personally don't see why Michigan's not playing Orgy. I don't understand it. I think he's the better quarterback. I don't like this 2-quarterback system. I think and it's a cliche, but 2 quarterbacks is no quarterback. And Texas has their guy in Quinn Ewers. They may also have a guy in Arch Manning that is also ridiculous and has more swag than any Manning we've ever seen before. I saw him hit like some horn celebration. Oh my gosh, he looked absurd. He looked awesome. But anyways,
love Texas, hate Texas. Arch Manning celebration was pretty solid.
That was very impressive, man. Very impressive.
Now, despite the noon kickoff, if you're looking to go to a game this week, it is expensive. But if you're in town, if you're in Ann Arbor, Michigan, you need to hit up that game.
That's gonna be huge. One thing I would note here, and it's something to pay attention to, Texas is down to like 3 scholarship running backs, I think. Their top 2 starters both have major injuries and are going to be out, if not for the season, then in a very extended period of time. So it is something to note that Texas may be looking for different ways of achieving their rushing production, be that through getting wide receivers on jet sweeps, be that through lining up receivers in the backfield and handing the ball off to them. They do still have Gibson, who is a good running back, but just something to note, especially with how much Michigan struggled with Fresno State. I see this going in one of 2 ways. I'm going to predict Texas though to win in this game. I just I like them a lot more than I like Michigan right
I think for Texas, this is a statement game. And for Michigan, well, it could be a statement game. I think Texas takes this one. I think Texas is the better football team. Now, if you're looking to sleep in a little bit and watch a really good game at 3:30, Iowa State at Iowa. Iowa, if you don't know, has a new offensive coordinator, and they actually scored a lot of points this past week, 40. Even though it was against a not great team, they scored points.
now. Iowa State, Iowa, man. The Battle of the Cornfields. This is going to be a great game. More than anything, it's going to be a rivalry game early in the season, which, by the way, anytime you see a rivalry game on early in the season, middle of the season, I don't care. Watch it. Watch it. The environments are spectacular. The crowd is always very into it. And the players, you can always tell there's a little bit something more riding on that game. A big out-of-conference matchup I'd be watching this week is Cal versus Auburn. There's been a little bit of hype around this Auburn team. I'm curious to see how they perform against some pretty legit competition. Cal is a pretty solid new ACC team for some reason. And they have one of the better running backs in college football as well, in Jay Ott. Look out for Ott. Oh my goodness, he's quick. He's so quick. If you want to see a guy that kind of runs like Kmart Chris Johnson, he is Kmart CJ2K. I mean, there's no other way of describing him, I think.
And for our evening games, there's a couple we could recommend here. Number one would be Tennessee and NC State in the Duke Mayo Classic. 2 highly anticipated potential playoff contending teams. And this is where we talk about Tennessee's quarterback, Nico Iamaleava.
Iamaleava looked out of his mind. And I understand it was Chattanooga, right? But Chattanooga's been a pretty good FCS team over
Top
the years.
10.
They've been a top 10 FCS team for a while. Now, I don't know how they are this year, to be fair. But, I mean, what tier of team you are doesn't have any sort of implication on how you throw the football. Nico Iamaleava was putting it through gaps I didn't even think existed. It was scary. Him and Dante Thornton had a connection all game long. And I feel like Tennessee, they open as a 7.5-point favorite against NC State. And I think that's pretty reasonable. I can see Tennessee winning this game by 2 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns even, especially with how poor NC State's offense looked in particular against Western Carolina. I do want to point out that Tennessee's got some issues defensively. That's the big concern for them. But defense is always going to be able to bring pressure. James Pierce Jr. is going to find you.
If there's anything to point out about Tennessee's game this past week, James Pierce only played 10 snaps. He is the number 1 college football player in the country. He only played 10 snaps against Chattanooga. How much defensive pressure could have been generated that wasn't? And the backups looked pretty good.
Caleb Herring was the one I watched, and I don't think he won a whole lot, but oh my gosh, the pressure he was getting was just outstanding. He's huge. He's so big. If you've never, seen like an Instagram video of him, huge. He's so big. And he's very, very built. So just watch out for Caleb Herring in the future also for Tennessee. He's a fun.
NC State, on the other hand, they have a really good run game, but they just couldn't make things work well against Western Carolina until the 4th quarter.
It felt like they were pressing a lot of the game. And you can kind of tell when a team's pressing based on how much they get away from a game plan that seems to be, pretty understood, right? Grayson McCall threw the ball 40 times against Western Carolina. I don't think that was their game plan. I don't. That's all I really got to say about that.
It'll be interesting to see the changes they make moving into their week 2 game. Now, another interesting evening game to watch is at 10 o'clock on Peacock. We have Boise State at Oregon. Now, we talked a lot about Boise State and their run game. We talked a little bit about Oregon and their struggles against Idaho.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you right now, and I don't want to just analyze the line for all these because this isn't, a betting channel, but it is a good idea to get an idea of where people are at. Oregon's not going to win this game by 19 and a half. I don't think. Boise State may be a less talented team, but Ashton Genty is a one-man freaking wrecking crew. All right? Get your backpack and pack your trail mix because, buddy, he's going to take you for a hike if you're not ready. He is that sort of running back. I would expect Boise State to keep this game within 10. I'm not saying they may outright win, but Genty is a special talent. Their offensive line looked really good, and I get it was Georgia Southern. The defense does not look great. I will say that. The defense for Boise State struggled a lot. But I also got to give credit to Georgia Southern. They were pulling out every single trick in the book, and they were really, really getting there. I don't know how I feel really about it. Dylan Gabriel looked really, really good, and as bad as that Boise State secondary looked, I feel like it's going to get carved up. Yeah, I don't know. I don't feel like Oregon's winning this game by 19 and a half. I think the line is probably more like a 12 and a half line. I think that would be a more reasonable line to set. But Boise State, Oregon would be a game to watch for sure if you happen to have Peacock.
And if you're better, just stay off that game. It's so risky. You could bet the under.
I don't know why you'd bet the under based on the fact that Boise State could score a ton of points and Oregon could score a ton of points. Just Oregon didn't last week. There is another 10:30 game, though, I definitely want to be paying attention to, and that's Mississippi State, Arizona State. You don't see a lot of Pac-12 SEC matchups. You just don't. So I'm curious to see what it looks like. Mississippi State's a team that's probably not going to be great in the SEC this season. Having to obviously deal with a major death in Mike Leach, I just think makes it so hard as a program. I mean, you got to almost start from square one in some ways, and I can't imagine what that's like. But it's a game where I'm curious because I think they're pretty similar teams. I think they're kind of both on the lower end of their respective conferences. I think Arizona State's slowly getting better and better, but it's one of those games I'm very curious to watch.
And especially Arizona State in the new Big 12. This could be a statement game for them if they pull out a win. Because that shows that they can compete in the Big 12, where they may not have in the Pac-12.
The Pac-12, and I'm going to point this out to people continuously. If the Pac-12 still existed, it'd probably be like the third best conference.
Maybe second.
I don't think it would be second because the Big Ten. Even the Big Ten without their Pac-12 additions, Ohio State, Michigan. I think Ohio State's going to be really good this year. I do. But that'll be a different topic. So one thing we're going to talk about real quick before we get done with our week preview is a game going on right now. A little bit of recap built in. Boston College, Florida State. It's currently 21-13. Florida State is down with 5:19 in the third quarter left. What are your thoughts on the game? And then, let's just be honest. What are your thoughts on Florida State?
That's quite an interesting game. When I was watching Boston College and Florida State last year, I thought Boston College could pull off the upset. It was at Boston College, but Florida State persevered regardless and went undefeated. This game, though, even though it's at Florida State, we all watched Florida State with Georgia Tech in Ireland. Florida State just stunk.
And we didn't comment on it, but I didn't think there was really a need to. DJ Uiagalelei is like a liability at quarterback. He may be and I don't mean this in any sort of negative way towards him, right? It's obviously a very big achievement to be able to play football at an ACC school, at a Pac-12 school where he played at Oregon State. It is infinitely harder, and I have so much respect for him as a person, as a man, to be able to go in and put that effort in to do that. But he's currently the worst quarterback in terms of his liability, because it just feels like when he's on the field, something bad is going to happen. Can't really throw the ball downfield. Actually, he did just throw for a touchdown downfield, so maybe I should shut up. but I just don't trust him. I don't trust him in big games. I don't trust him in big moments. I think he gets skittish. That is my opinion. Could I be wrong? Yes, but he's got to prove me wrong. And again, this is no disrespect towards him. It's obviously incredible to be an athlete at the college level. It's really he is a tank of a human being. Absolutely super hard runner of the football. But I mean, Boston College has it again at the Florida State 35. So 4:35 left to go. This is a lot.
Now, this could also apply in our next subject, which is playoff implications. We're going to talk a little bit about the first four in and the first four out.
I'm going to hit on the first four in this week. Next week, we're going to switch it, and I'm going to do the next four out. And that's mainly because it's not going to keep one of us getting berated by the comments. But on a serious note, I think it's an interesting idea to kind of discuss what teams we think are in the playoffs very obviously. And I want one of these teams to kind of seem like an outside chance, but just a team you want to talk about that you feel good about maybe getting into the playoffs once per week. And then, same for you. I want you to give me a team that might seemingly be in right now that you're going to talk about, and then all of a sudden be like, but they're out to me. Maybe that's a team like Clemson, who, after only one loss to Georgia, an admittedly outstanding Georgia team, they're out for you, for example. But yeah, anyway, that's a little inside baseball. But we're going to talk about our first four in, at least I am, and then my partner here is going to talk a little bit about the first four out. First team I'm going to have in is Ohio State. They play the softest cupcake schedule I've ever seen any Power 5 team play, and they look very talented. That's all I got to say. I don't have any trust for them when the playoff actually comes around, when they have to play teams consistently of their talent level, but I just don't know. I think Ohio State's going to get in. I don't have great faith for them after that point. I think they will beat Michigan this year, especially if Michigan sticks to this 2-quarterback system. My second team in is going to be, shockingly, Georgia. I know. That's insane. What do you mean Georgia's going to make a 12-team playoff format? Yeah, Georgia's going to make a 12-team playoff format. Georgia looks really, really good right now. Carson Beck struggled a little bit in the first half, not going to lie, but played a lot better in the second half, looked a lot better. I think Georgia's almost a definitive lock for the playoff just based on the way that they played against Clemson. I expect that sort of play to continue. The third lock I'm going to have is a little bit of an interesting one, and I just want you to hear me out on this. I think Alabama is a lock, and here's why. Alabama plays a really hard schedule this year, but I was very impressed by Caleb DeBoer. I think even with 2 losses, Alabama gets in because they have a really, really rough schedule. And I think that, Caleb DeBoer was incredibly, incredibly impressive in that first showing. I feel good about this Alabama team. I did not expect to say that after Nick Saban left. I did not. But I watched the way they played. They played very, very hard, very, very fast. And I think 2 SEC teams are going to get in almost guaranteed. I think at most we might be looking at 4 SEC teams getting in, maybe even 5.
Maybe 6.
I don't think they're going to take up half the field. That's my issue. I could see them taking up 5, but half the field I think is a little bit too much. I think they're going to have to, because you got 4 spots that get taken up by everything else, right? So in terms of SEC, SEC is probably going to get in. Whenever the SEC gets in, almost guaranteed. Lastly, my fourth team that I'm going to have in as of today, and this might age like milk, but it is, in my opinion, the best team in the Big 12. And that's Kansas State. They played UT Martin. They weren't a team I really loved watching, but I was impressed by the way Avery Johnson played in this game. He didn't do necessarily great. He was 14 for 21, 153 yards, 2 touchdowns, and he had a pick. But I feel really good about Kansas State in this current Big 12 climate. They're a similar team to me, like Miami in a lot of ways, where I feel like they got great talent just all around them, and the surrounding Big 12 just doesn't look great. I like that Texas Tech, which would have been one of their primary competitors, didn't look good. I'm just going to be honest. It didn't look good against Abilene Christian. And I think the next best team's probably Utah, and they're an interesting one, but I also don't think their quarterback's ever going to make it through a full season ever. And I think Avery Johnson's probably a little bit better than Cam Rising, even after just a little bit of a short watch, because, it was definitely an adjustment, but I think he did play very, very well. So, yeah, that's my first 4 in. It might age like milk. That's okay. But I really I feel good about these teams. I do.
And now to look at our first four out. This is the controversial one that fans of these teams may not like. But we're going to start with two teams that played each other this week, LSU and USC. Both teams, I get it's week one. Both teams looked very undisciplined on both sides of the ball. One team had to win, both teams should have lost. Both of these teams will not make the playoff. Both could be 7-5. Now for the next team, Oklahoma. Oklahoma's first season in the SEC is this year, and they've been kind of streaky in the Big 12 over the past several years. They had a great season last season and probably would have been a playoff contender. However, I just don't think in the SEC they're really going to pan out. And fourth, another SEC team, Ole Miss. While Ole Miss had a pretty good transfer portal class, and while they have a decent coaching staff, I don't see them winning in the big games. Last year, they struggled pretty badly in the big games, and with players like Jackson Dart and Quinshon Judkins. So I don't see Ole Miss coming on top of some of their bigger games. They could finish 9-3, 8-4. 9-3 could get them in the playoff, but I don't think 8-4 will.
So you're not taking the easy way out on this, are you? You're saying Florida State's got a shot?
Florida State might have a chance. They lose to Boston College here. However, it's not to say the rest of their season they can't win out. And if they do, they might have a chance at competing for their conference. They might just need to get the ball rolling.
I'll say this. I think Florida State loses to Miami on a neutral field. But all right, guys. Well, thank you for listening to our psychotic ramblings we like to call a podcast. We are going to be back again next week about the same time to talk about some biased takes, some review of the wonderful week we had in college football. Maybe it'll be shorter, maybe it'll be longer. It depends on what all we got to say. And of course, we're going to hit those halftime shows of the week as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to come back and join us, please do. I'm looking forward to it, and we'll see you soon.
Leave a comment for your totally biased takes this week, and be sure to subscribe to get notifications for our next episode.
Like it. I know you're a college football fan. If you somehow found this video, I'd drop it a like. Let other college football fans know, hey, there's a podcast now for college football. Is there even college football podcasts? That's the whole reason we made this. I'm a big fan of listening to podcasts while I work, while I study, do whatever. And not a lot of college football content out there for me to listen to. And it is my big passion. It is my hyperfixation, if you will. So, yeah, love football season. Love all the things that come with it. But if you do too, make sure you hit that like button. Of course, comment, like my partner said. And I think we will see you all later.